Well, energy analysts say a $1 billion investment in the South Australian energy sector is proof that government funds will be a driving force behind a net zero future. Sky News Adelaide reporter Joel Philp has the details.
$660 million is being coughed up by the Commonwealth Government, $422 by the state government, and that will be spent on a variety of energy projects. For example, unlocking gas reserves here in South Australia, kickstarting the development of an interconnector between South Australia and New South Wales, which will enable the two states to share excess renewable energy, and also in really building up South Australia's fledgling hydrogen industry. Similar deals have been done between the federal government and New South Wales and Tasmania. Take a listen to what the Prime Minister and South Australia's Premier had to say when announcing the energy bill yesterday.
Australia is being looked to transform how hydrogen is developed and used, particularly in business and in heavy industry. The big gains that will be made towards getting towards net zero are going to be made because of the innovations in technologies and particularly in the area of hydrogen.
Energy prices are coming down. This new agreement for energy and emissions reductions is going to take us to the next level. It is all about lower cost energy, it's about lower emissions, and importantly, it's about creating jobs in the renewable sector here in our state.
Energy analysts that have been watching this situation very closely say it's interesting because it's a demonstration that governments are willing to spend money to, announce policies that steer the market and also make some fairly risky investments in new technology that private industry is not willing to make at this stage. The Prime Minister himself has always said that it'll be innovation and not taxes which drive Australia's trip towards reduced carbon emissions. However, in this case, it's a bit of both camps. It's public money being spent on innovative new projects. Green groups say that this isn't far enough because of the focus on gas production here in South Australia, instead of a more comprehensive focus on clean technology. However, both the South Australian and federal government say they needed to guarantee reliable and cheap energy for South Australians.
For more on this, I'm now joined by Ben Hurd, founder of Bright New World. Ben, good morning. Is it a smart deal?
There's a lot in this deal, still a little bit of detail remaining. What it really shows is that, along with the recent agreement struck with New South Wales, that federal and state governments are now prepared to take a firmer hand on our energy future. I think there is something smart about that. We've been through an era where we've been setting policy environments and then expecting a market to respond in a way that's going to deliver an energy transition. Now, the fact is, when we're transitioning so comprehensively, one of the most important underlying systems, which is our national energy system, that can actually lead to fairly disorganised and fairly risky outcomes with more uncertainty than certainty. So I do think that it is smart to see a clearer steer on the direction of the future energy systems coming from government. What is actually in that and what that direction is where we're going to still see debate and disagreements among stakeholders and observers for quite a while.
So could we see flow-on effects then for the national energy market?
Yes, I think we will. These announcements are starting to set directions that go out into a longer term than we've had before. So what these announcements are starting to suggest is that both the federal and the state governments are relatively committed to raising the penetration of energy sources from variable renewable energy like wind and solar, which can now, in a simple form, be delivered in its own right at very low cost. But in terms of integrating it into the overall system, what is going to be the supporting infrastructure that gets built around that to enable that? And what we're seeing here is that a very substantial statement is being made on the role for fossil gas in supporting that transition. That is obviously going to lead to tension and controversy because we do have a traditional fossil fuel being reinforced and backed in to support a transition to incorporating more variable renewable energy technologies. If we add to that a little bit of additional transmission and some other new projects, you start to see the sort of portfolio of technologies that perhaps Australia is heading towards with a little more commitment than we've seen before.
You mentioned infrastructure. The federal government has committed about $50 million to the electricity interconnector. Is that enough?
That's a good question, and that remains to be seen. With that interconnector between South Australia and New South Wales, that's really a new backbone crossing quite a large open part of the country where there is a lot of renewable energy resource availability, but there's no market and there's very little opportunity for connection and to move power from those places to demand centres and between demand centres. So we've had a situation where that interconnector is coming in as actually a pretty expensive project. It's been cleared by the regulator, but not with any special rules or concessions for the operators that want to develop that project. Here we have a bit of an injection of funds, $50 or to $100 million in the context of a $2.4 billion project, which should be aimed at de-risking that, doing some of the early preparatory works so that those organisations will then be able to pick it up and proceed under the rules and structures of their investments in the market. Whether or not that will actually be enough to get that project fully green-lighted remains to be seen. But it is a very interesting sign. It would appear that both the federal government and the South Australian government are quite committed to getting at least that crucial new part of the transmission network built and developed, because without it, it will be very difficult to continue adding more renewables to the national electricity market.
All right, well, it's an interesting partnership. Ben Hurd, thank you for joining me.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.